We're born without asking for it, and we die without knowing. This simple phrase encapsulates the absurdity of existence, according to Carlo Michelstaedter. A philosopher who questioned everything, he stripped away the illusions that society builds its foundations on. His ideas represent a profound dive into the hidden structures of our world, a fierce critique of human life and the fate of those who, believing they are truly living, are merely stumbling through a reality constructed on deception and self-delusion. Engaging with his work isn't just about learning from a philosopher, it's about facing an unrelenting confrontation with a thought that constantly challenges, shaking the very ground of certainty. His words evoke an unsettling intimacy, making it almost natural to refer to him simply as Carlo, like a close friend who, even when pushing you beyond your limits, demands your attention. In this video, we'll delve into his radical philosophy, exploring his most extreme ideas to understand his uncompromising view of life, society, and the modern human condition. Let's begin by noting that he was born on June 3, 1887, in Gorizia, which was then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, to a middle-class Jewish family. The youngest of 4 siblings, Carlo grew up surrounded by a cultured and open-minded environment. From an early age, his brilliance and sensitivity stood out. However, despite his family's Jewish bourgeois background, they were burdened by the weight of societal expectations. His father, Alberto, a prominent figure in the city's cultural scene and director of the Gorizia branch of the insurance company Aurora Generali, epitomized the ideal of the rhetorical man, someone who lives by societal rules without ever questioning them. For Carlo, his father symbolized everything that was wrong with society's imposed norms, and this tension between the strictness of his upbringing and his thirst for freedom became a central theme in his philosophical development. From a young age, he began challenging the structures imposed on him, and this inner conflict would shape his radical thinking. After completing his studies at the Classical High School in Gorizia, Carlo enrolled in Vienna's Faculty of Mathematics in 1905. However, his journey soon led him to Florence, where he dedicated himself to the study of art and philosophy. He immersed himself in the works of classical philosophers, from Plato and Aristotle to modern thinkers like Schopenhauer and Nietzsche. By 1909, he returned to Gorizia to focus on writing his thesis, fully committing to his craft. It was during this period, while working on his thesis Persuasion and Rhetoric, that Carlo's sense of isolation deepened. The loss of his older brother Gino to suicide a few years earlier haunted him, and the weight of his despair became unbearable. Yet this wasn't depression in the typical sense. Rather, it was a sharp, rational frustration. He saw life as a meaningless chase toward nothingness, with society acting as a vast mechanism of self-deception. His growing intellectual clarity was matched by an increasing spiritual oppression. On October 17, 1910, at the age of 23, he submitted his thesis to the University of Florence, seemingly completing his academic journey. Yet just hours later, Carlo took a shocking and irreversible step, ending his life with a single shot. Was this a philosophical act, the culmination of his thinking, or the desperate action of someone overwhelmed by the bleakness of his worldview? The answer remains elusive, raising unsettling questions to this day. But the tragedy did not end with his death. His father Alberto passed away in 1929, and the woman Carlo had loved, Nadia Baradan, took her own life a few years after his. The devastation continued during World War II, when, in November 1943, his mother, Emma, and sister, Elda, were arrested by the Nazis and deported to concentration camps, where they perished. The only surviving member of the family was his sister, Paula, who managed to escape to Switzerland, evading both world wars and Nazi persecution. What started as a university thesis soon became his most important work, Persuasion and Rhetoric, published posthumously in 1913, thanks to the efforts of his friend Vladimiro Aranjo Ruiz. The text transcended its academic origins, evolving into a fierce critique of civilization itself. Carlo exposed how humanity deceives itself into believing it controls its life, when in reality it's enslaved by it. Initially read by a select few, the work has grown to be recognized as one of the most profound philosophical manifestos of the 20th century, shaking anyone who engages with it. Now, let's examine some key ideas that reveal the full depth and radical nature of his thought. Carlo begins with a stark observation. Society imposes an order based not on truth, but on rhetoric, a constructed language designed to build a shared illusion. From the moment we are born, we're led down a predetermined path, unknowingly accepting the rules of a game we never agreed to. This results in a life confined by invisible bars, where adherence to societal norms is mistaken for genuine fulfillment. So, what happens when someone rejects these imposed limitations? Carlo defines persuasion as the state in which an individual breaks free from the chains of conformity and achieves an authentic existence, one that isn't dependent on external approval. The distinction between persuasion and rhetoric goes beyond theory, it's existential. Rhetoric is the language of the world, the mechanism through which society convinces individuals they are free when they're actually following a script. Through norms, institutions, and culture, society ensures everyone stays in their designated place, living lives preordained and unquestioned. In contrast, persuasion represents the state of those who dare to look beyond the illusion, rejecting compromise, and choosing to live according to their true nature. The main issue with rhetoric is that it offers comfort. In their desperate attempt to escape the anguish of uncertainty, people prefer self-deception over confronting the unknown. A prime example of this is how society defines success, through career, social status, and recognition. These external validations push people to seek constant approval, forfeiting their inner freedom in the process. Carlo, however, argues that real fulfillment doesn't lie in conformity. It's about discovering an authentic sense of self. To understand this, one can look to the ancient sage. Socrates, for example, didn't seek ready-made answers, but instead encouraged the constant questioning of certainty. His famous phrase, "I know that I know nothing," was not an act of humility, but an invitation to reject blindly accepted truths. Similarly, Carlo urges a break from rhetoric, advocating for persuasion as the only path to a truly meaningful and fulfilling life. One of the most striking elements of his thought is his critique of both science and traditional philosophy. He believed that both fall into the trap of rhetoric. Science, despite claiming objectivity, constructs models that oversimplify human existence, while philosophy risks getting lost in abstractions that distance itself from real life. True knowledge, Carlo argued, cannot be a mere collection of concepts. It must be a lived experience. In this sense, persuasion isn't an abstract idea, it's a way of being in the world. Today, more than ever, we're surrounded by a constant stream of information, distracted by shallow goals and driven to conform to fleeting ideals of success. The danger is living without ever questioning what truly matters. Carlo's philosophy calls for a radical shift in perspective, stopping the chase for external validation and focusing instead on building a life based on deep self-awareness. The central question remains: is it possible to escape the rhetoric and live according to persuasion? This seemingly mild refusal unsettles the lawyer, setting the tone for the entire narrative. Bartleby does not protest, nor does he explain. He simply declines with unwavering calm. Later, Melville reflects. A man bound to his labor becomes a mere machine, copying day after day, losing fragments of his soul. Through this, Melville subtly critiques a system that slowly and silently drains individuals of their humanity. Bartleby's repeated phrase, "I would prefer not to," becomes a quiet form of defiance. He is not a revolutionary. Instead, he gradually retreats from the world. The lawyer, confused, initially tries to rationalize his behavior. "Perhaps he misunderstood my request," he muses. But as Bartleby's refusals persist, the lawyer begins to grasp the deeper implications. His scrivener represents a complete rejection of societal and professional expectations. As the story unfolds, we learn that Bartleby does not leave the office. He sleeps on a shabby couch, living off nothing but ginger biscuits, entirely detached from the outside world. Melville writes, "The wall outside his window was all Bartleby knew of the world, and he seemed strangely content with it." This stark image captures his self-imposed isolation and the bleak realities of modern life. Out of both concern and frustration, the lawyer attempts to help him. He offers money, suggests other job opportunities, and even moves his office to escape the burden of Bartleby's presence. Yet Bartleby remains unmoved, like an immovable pillar, resisting all attempts to change his fate. When asked why he won't leave, his response remains unchanged. "I would prefer not to." One of the most haunting revelations comes when we learn Bartleby once worked in the dead letter office in Washington, sorting undelivered mail. This detail casts a chilling light over his character. Melville writes, "What is more tragic than dead letters? Messages of love, hope, and forgiveness that never reach their destination."